what is your sense of like what the discussion is going to be about?
I think the discussion is going to be about Donald Trump.
I wonder why Donald Trump is the focus of Canadians right now. Because, oh right, that's all the media has been talking about, and that's all the Liberals have been talking about.
The polls continue to remain sporadic, but that hasn't stopped the mainstream media from trying to influence the general public that Canada is starting to love the Liberals again. We're here to ensure that everyone sees what the reality actually is and why we all must stay grounded and not succumb to fear-mongering.
Let's take a look.
The next few days and weeks are going to be busy here in Ottawa. Incoming Prime Minister Mark Carney has to be sworn in. So does a new cabinet. And we are expecting an election call as soon as next week. Just how close of a race could Canadians be in for? Nick Nanos is Chief Data Scientist and founder of Nanos Research, and he has some brand new numbers to help us answer that question. Hey, Nick. Good to see you. The race kept getting tighter and tighter over the past few weeks. It's now extremely tight, according to your latest numbers. Tell us about them.
Vash, did you have a coin for me to toss so we can do that statistical coin toss?
Yeah. You know, we got a horse race.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the thing is, there's only 1 percentage point between the Conservatives and the Liberals, basically within the margin of error for the survey. The margin of error is plus or minus 3%. So basically a coin toss right now between the Conservatives and the Liberals. NDP down 15, which is not good for the Orange team, right? And that's helped the Liberals over the last couple of weeks. You know, Bloc's still doing okay in the province of Quebec. Green Party's actually been down too. So we've seen movement from the Greens and the NDP to the Liberals, kind of like the scenario that the Conservatives don't want, that coalescence of progressive voters around the Liberals.
And let's talk a little bit about how fast you've seen those numbers move, right? Because 6 weeks ago, a month ago, how different were they than they are today? Like, how fast has that change occurred?
Well, 6 weeks ago, it was like 47-20. So just think for the Conservatives, they're down 11 points in the last number of weeks, and the Liberals are up 15 points in the last 6 to 7 weeks. So, you know, what we're seeing is basically, I'd call it a whiplash, right? It's kind of like, whoa, these numbers have significantly changed. Now, we have to remember, when the numbers change like this, they could always change back, because you know what? The trend line has not solidified. It's going to take a couple more weeks to see whether the Liberals can consolidate or whether the Conservatives can punch back. So, you know, just because the Liberals are trending up now doesn't mean that they'll continue.
Well, I'm glad you raised that, because I was curious. I've been thinking, you know, in the past few days, is it that they are here on the ascent, or is this the peak, or how do you ultimately determine that?
Well, you know, one of the things that we look at is accessible voters, whether people would consider or not consider. It's kind of like, are you on the political menu for for Canadians? And over the last 6 weeks, an increasing number of Canadians have said that they'd be open to voting Liberal. That's been on the upswing, about 10 to 15 points. And the proportion of Canadians that are open to voting Conservative has gone down, which means whatever the Conservatives have done in the last few weeks has turned off some voters who basically said, you know what, I might have voted for the Conservatives 8, 9, 10 weeks last year, but that now they're taking them off the political menu. That's what the Conservatives have to really worry about.
So, just so everybody knows, the audio is CTV's problem, not ours.
For once.
Now, I think that's kind of rich for Nick to sit there and say, for some reason, whatever the Conservatives have done over the last, few weeks. So the Conservatives have been doing the same thing that they have been doing. Have they been a little bit less vocal over what's been going on? Yeah.
Well, there's been an election in Ontario, right?
Well, there's been an election in Ontario, so the federal Conservatives have backed off. And there's been a Liberal leadership race, which, guess what? Like, this is the thing. There was a provincial election going in Ontario, and all of the media in Ontario was talking about that less than they were talking about the Liberal leadership race and Mark Carney.
True story.
What does that tell you, right? So it's not what have the Conservatives done or not done. It's what has the mainstream media done. Like, even the headline here, Conservative lead down to 1 point. Well, like, you can't just say that because that's one poll.
But the interesting thing about this poll in particular that Vashi and Nick are discussing and Nick kind of touches on it, but doesn't come right out and say it. This was a rolling poll. They've taken this data from over the past 4 weeks and aggregated it to create this result.
Right. So what they've done is they've taken 250 responses 1 week, 250 responses the next week, 250 responses the next week, and 250 responses in the final week. Like, are these the same people? Are they different people? We don't know. So, but their sample size is 1,000.
Which is pretty meager for a poll. And again, it's an average over the past 4 weeks. So 4 weeks ago, support for the Liberals could have been very, very high, and it's now starting to taper off. We don't know because this particular poll is a rolling poll.
Versus some of the other pollsters that they capture a moment in time, so they will get 1,000 or 15 responses, but they're individual responses in the same time period.
Right. Usually they'll collect their data over a week time span. And in that week, you might have 40% of people saying, yes, I'm going to vote Conservative. And that's what it looks like with, I think it was Innovative Research just dropped another poll within the last day or two. And theirs was at 41% Conservative, if I'm not misremembering.
So at least Nick had said that we don't know if this is where the Liberals will be. This could be a peak, especially because A, this was a rolling average finishing on March 2nd, meaning the first 250 responses, so a quarter of that poll began in the beginning of February. So we don't really know, what this poll actually means.
But the mainstream media is reporting it like this is a sure thing. They're not reporting that it's a rolling poll. They're reporting that the Conservatives only have a 1% lead over the Liberals. Like, it's being completely misconstrued by the media. And considering many mainstream media outlets either hire these pollsters to do the work for them or they have their own pollsters on staff, they should know how this works.
Well, and they should be reporting it honestly.
We're in the field for this concluding Friday, right?
Yep.
So that's before the announcement of Mark Carney officially. I mean, I think people had a sense that he would be the leader, but the official announcement.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting to see whether there's any further impact of the Liberal leadership. And the Conservatives are running ads hard throughout the Liberal leadership. Yeah, on your show.
Everyone's show, yeah. Yeah, and just jumping off that, preferred prime minister, you've got some numbers there as well, I think.
Yeah.
You can pull them up on the screen. Polyev sitting at 33.1. Trudeau, because that's who was still prime minister at the time of the survey, 29.9.
Yeah, and you know what? Pierre Poilievre down 9 points in the last 4 weeks as preferred prime minister. So you just think of it this way, Vashi. The ballot numbers are going down for the Conservatives. Accessible voters are going down for the Conservatives. The proportion of Canadians that would give Pierre Poilievre a tip of the hat as prime minister going down over the last number of weeks. So, the Conservatives got to turn this around. They've got to pivot. So maybe the lesson here is whatever the Conservatives are doing now, it is not working. It is not working. They have to pivot and change in order to try to fight this trend line.
Well, let me ask you about that to conclude, because you've done some great surveys as well about what people care about and what's going to influence their vote. And one that jumped out at me over the weekend was this one about the degree to which that's going to be Donald Trump. I think that there's a bit of an aversion to the idea of pivot for Conservatives because they keep saying, look, we're putting out policy when it has to do with Donald Trump. We know their ads are very much focused on Mark Carney right now, and you can see those numbers about what influences your vote up there. What is your sense of, what the discussion is going to be about?
I think the discussion is going to be about Donald Trump, and that's going to be the focus on the lens for voters for both the Conservatives and the Liberals. Realistically, the Conservatives probably should be running ads about Donald Trump and what Pierre Poilievre, what his position is on that, how he is different, and how he would manage that. He's got to build his brand. He's got to look like a prime minister in waiting. Right? Because obviously that's what he wants. He wants to win the election and they want to form the government. He has to start looking like a prime minister in waiting when the reality is these ads reinforce him as the opposition leader. Right? He's attacking the other side and he's not building himself up.
I wonder why Donald Trump is the focus of Canadians right now. Because, that's all the media has been talking about, and that's all the Liberals have been talking about.
Right. I am surprised, shocked, that affordability was not on that list anywhere. Not number one, not number two, unless they lumped it in with the economy.
Well,
but
there was the economy. Housing was down to 4%.
But just affordability in general. I brought our son to the grocery store the other day just to buy a few things for dinner, not really much, and it was almost $100. And I'm looking at the bag that we're carrying out going, how is this $100 worth of groceries?
Well, I think what CTV did, or rather what Nanos did, is he broke affordability apart into a bunch of those smaller categories. Because taxes was there, healthcare was there, housing was there. So they were all separate categories, but that is all affordability. So it's interesting how they broke that out. But again, when all the media has been ramming down people's throats, Donald Trump's coming to take over Canada, like all this crap. What the heck do you think people are going to be prioritizing? Like it's this just 1984 feedback loop, right?
Well, and it's concerning when you have a media that is being funded by this liberal government, that they're pushing the narrative. They're telling Canadians what they should be worried about. And they're doing it in a way that seems like, look over here and not over here, because we want to keep our jobs. We want to keep our government funding.
Well, think of it this way. So the media starts on with this, Donald Trump's coming to get you. Donald Trump's coming to get you. Donald Trump is coming to take over Canada. Donald Trump is coming to take over the economy. He's going to take over your jobs. You're going to be broke. We're going to be screwed. And then they go and poll people, and then they turn around and say, Canadians are most concerned about Donald Trump. Like, are you kidding me?
And one other thing that I didn't touch on earlier in regards to Nick Nanos is he had said himself that they expect support for the Liberals to be higher right now because, when they were asking people this question, who's your preferred prime minister, and also who are you going to vote for, the leadership race hadn't concluded yet. So when they were asking people to answer this survey, the race was still going on. And he had said, after the race, we expect it to come down a bit because the people who were going to vote Liberal because of Chrystia Freeland, maybe they don't vote Liberal anymore. Maybe they don't vote at all. Maybe the people who were going to vote for Bayliss or Gould, now they're not going to vote, or maybe they're going to vote for a different party because they don't want to vote Liberal because their favorite leader is not the Prime Minister. So I would anticipate that these numbers would come down, and I'm honestly surprised that Nick didn't reinforce that.
Well, think of it this way. The Liberals have been the only one on the playing field, basically, for the last 2 months because of this Liberal leadership race. The media has not been talking about the Conservatives. The only messaging that we're getting is from Pierre Poilievre, and that's it, because the media is just not talking about them. They're talking about Chrystia Freeland. They're talking about Mark Carney and Mark Carney and Mark Carney. So,
well, and don't forget that during a provincial election, the Ontario provincial election, typically the federal party lies low for a while so that, the message isn't confused. They're not typically going door knocking during that time either because, again, they don't want to confuse people that you've got a federal candidate at the door talking to them about federal policies when there's a provincial election a week away.
Well, and when a federal election is going to be called, now the other teams get to come back on the field because they're actually going to have to start talking about these other parties again. So, yeah, that's expected to happen. Now, deep breath. Now, let's bring people back into reality. So, this was a March 2nd poll. March 2nd.
And it was rolling over 4 weeks, to our understanding.
So let's take a look at one of the recent polls this week from Innovative Research. So this is Innovative Research. And what you see here is you see that bump coming from the Liberals, and they had that in their last poll. But you're now starting to see a rebound from the Conservatives. Now, the interesting thing here is it looks like the Conservatives actually stole voters from the NDP, not the Liberals. So they've actually jumped all the way back up to 41%, and the Liberals are at 31%. So Conservatives are in majority territory here. Okay? So that's one of the latest ones from Innovative Research. And this is just to remind everybody, this is we're still waiting on the latest Abacus poll. This was one that completed on February 25th. So this was before the conclusion of the leadership race. So this is about a week before Nick Nanos' poll finished, and they're showing a 12-point lead for the Conservatives. So this is very similar. Now, Ecos, we're not even going to show it to you
Because it's a nightmare.
because it's garbage. They are showing the Liberals in majority territory.
Well, and as far as I'm concerned, when you make statements publicly like, you're not going to let Pierre Poilievre win no matter what.
And they don't make idle threats.
Right. Unfortunately, you can't be trusted as a source.
Well, and they are the only polling firm to significantly increase the number of polls that they've done since January. Isn't that interesting? To show a meteoric rise in the Liberals. Isn't that interesting? And then they're the only ones that show the Liberals in majority territory right now. And all of that has dragged the 338 aggregate average up to a point where, unfortunately, and it's not the crew at 338's fault, it's just how the data is being aggregated. You can't trust 338 anymore. That's the problem. So now we have to go back to looking at individual polls, but even that, at this point, there's not much point in doing that. Now, why would the mainstream media, and everybody probably knows the answer to this, why would the mainstream media decide to just jump on the Liberal bandwagon and push this? Well, here's the reason why. This is a page from the federal budget in 2024. So there's one major item on here that everybody should look at, and it's in paragraph 4, where it says that the government is giving over $780 million in direct support for the media industry through the Canadian Media Fund. Now, if you go down to the second last paragraph, where it says that Canadian journalism labor tax credits are from $55,000 to $85,000 per eligible employee, and temporarily increasing the tax credit rate from 25% to 35%. So what does that mean? It means that they get over $780 million in direct funding, and in paying their employees, they can apply for this tax credit where they can actually receive back 35% of that salary between that salary range. That's a lot of money, folks. That's a heck of a lot of money.
Yeah.
So they're earning their paycheck, and they're earning their hopeful new paycheck that they're hoping to see in the next federal election, because guess what's going to happen when the Conservatives get in?
That gravy train's going to end.
Gravy train's over. So this is what's happening. Now, one other thing that we wanted to call out from the Abacus poll, because Abacus looks at other things just like Nanos does, and one of the things that they've been looking at is Mark Carney and his favorability rating versus his unfavorability rating, meaning how many people have said, yeah, I like Mark Carney, versus how many people are saying, I don't like Mark Carney. So he announced his campaign in early January. So nobody really, quote unquote, knew who he was. Barely anybody still knows who he is. So he had an unfavorability or negative rating of 14% and a positive rating of 19%. So the media kicked into high gear. All of a sudden, his positivity rate jumped to 33%, and then his negativity rating jumped to 20%. Now, the more Carney talked, the more Canadians listened. And within 1 month, his positivity rating went up 3%, but his negativity rating went up 6%, with the 6% occurring within the last couple of weeks.
So essentially, his likability has plateaued, but his negativity has skyrocketed.
Right. And that's most likely going to continue because people are starting to see him more in the media. Remember, he's been hiding from everyone, which is interesting. It's interesting that barely anybody knows who this guy is, and then all of a sudden he had a landslide victory in the Liberal leadership race. But now you're going to have to come in front of the media. You're going to have to talk to people. And you talk down to people. You talk down to people whether you know it or not.
Oh, and his face talks down to people, right? He makes
he sits
grimaces.
there like this.
Yeah, he grimaces, maybe not realizing that he's doing it, but when he's talking, he just has this look on his face sometimes. Watch for it.
Well, and he also has this look of, oh, you're asking me a question. You don't deserve to ask me a question.
That's what I mean. He's got this look on his face, like his mannerisms give him away.
So where does this lead us, folks? Well, an election is coming. We know that, so that's a good thing. We know Trudeau's on the way out. That's a good thing.
Yeah, he was carrying his chair out.
Yeah.
Which watch
Which
our
he
other
paid
video for
for,
that.
which
He's
he
not
paid for.
stealing it. He did pay for it.
And but this is the thing. We've been getting more and more emails and seeing comments from people that they're volunteering for their riding association. They're going out door knocking. They're getting involved. That's amazing to see. Do not leave anything on the ice, people. Make sure you can do whatever you can to ensure that the Liberals are not going to win this next election, and that the Conservatives surprise the Liberals up here, just like they did down in the States, with a landslide victory.